Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Aero.NextGen Tech Talk. I'm Anna, Customer Success Manager at Aero.NextGen, the platform that helps aviations and MROs companies find the right software and solutions for their operations. Today, we are talking about something that almost every aviation company experiences, but rarely talks about it, the aviation trade show problem. Why most leads never turn into opportunities. If you ever attended an event like MRO America or any major industry show, you know how much effort goes into preparing, traveling, exhibiting, and networking. But here's the real question. What actually happens to all those leads after the event ends? To help us break this down, I'm joined by someone who works directly with aviation companies on CRMI, strategy automation, and sales process. Today's guest is Omi Diaz from Level 350 by Diaz Cooper. Hi, Omi. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. So before we start, would you like to introduce yourself and Level 350 just by Diaz Cooper?
Yeah, absolutely. So Diaz and Cooper is a HubSpot Platinum Solutions partner, and Level 350 is our brand for our aviation specific practice. And we've been in the marketplace for 25 years, with the last about 5 years or so being really focused on working with MROs, parts resellers, lessors, and aftermarket support firms.
That's great. Thank you. So, Omi, with MRO America just around the corner, let's start at the beginning. Why do you think aviation companies struggle so much to convert trade shows conversation into real sales opportunities? Because from what I see, companies collect dozens, sometimes hundreds of contacts at the events like this, and most of them they just disappear. So, what do you think
Yeah.
is the problem?
Yeah, it's tempting to think that maybe it's just that the leads were bad, but that's not actually true. The data shows that MRO and trade show leads are some of the highest converting leads ever, right? They're actually really good. So where's that disconnect? Where do they go to die, right? And what happens is that a lot of companies either have very cumbersome, slow manual processes, or they don't have a CRM driven revenue pipeline to bring those leads in and then do automated follow-ups. So what happens is that sometimes it takes reps weeks to input manually all of the information from those, like you said, dozens to hundreds of business cards that are like get stuck in a drawer and get done little by little. And by the time they finally get back to that prospect, they may have found another solution from someone that acted faster.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And it actually leads me to my next question. So, what typically happens to trade shows leads after events like MRO Americas? Are they actually being logged into CRM systems, or are most of them like getting lost in email inboxes and spreadsheets?
Yeah, that you nailed it, right? So these companies are having great conversations on the showroom floor or the show floor, but there's not a shared system to capture who spoke to who, what was discussed, what was that prospect interested in, and what were the agreed next steps, right? So without that CRM, where decisions about pipeline and capacity get made, what happens is those leads get lost in inboxes. Maybe there's a bunch of ad hoc spreadsheets, or maybe it's like I had one aviation exec tell me that they spent 3.5 hours over the weekend just manually inputting a batch of business cards and then with no context. Didn't even know which sales rep had gotten which card.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, so now let's talk about what good looks like. What does an effective pre-event, during event, and post-event follow-up process actually look like in practice?
Yes. So we've learned through trial and error that an effective system is going to treat your trade shows as a structured campaign with three clear phases, right? And so the first one we like to call the pre-event power up. And that's when you define the goals you want out of that event. You figure out how to measure that in true revenue and pipeline terms, like new contacts, new RFQs, net revenue influence, not just the number of people that stopped by or the number of people that picked up a pen, right? Then you want to build some sort of a tracking structure in your CRM so that you can connect those contacts, companies, and deals to that specific event. Why? Because then later on, you'll be able to measure the effectiveness of that event. But step two is the during event execution. So we really encourage a mobile capture method. In our case, it's the HubSpot app, which when the rep scans the business card with their mobile phone, it scans directly into the CRM, right? And then that triggers an immediate and personalized nice to meet you email while they're still talking at the booth, right? Our product also helps to route the lead to the right person based on territory, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to tag every contact to that specific event. And then after the event, you want to have a segmented nurture workflow that's going to be running different tracks, whether they were hot leads or whether they were just nurture leads, so that you're not just sending out that generic blast to everybody of thanks for stopping by the booth, right? So you can also set up your reps with sequences, again, that reference that conversation that was had at the booth. And you need a dashboard that can track all of that activity, as well as allow you to compare one event against another or the same event over time. And that's what we would say is the three-step system for really successful event follow-ups.
Yeah. Now you work with a lot of automations, as you just mentioned. What is the one automation you believe is a game changer for aviation companies trying to manage trade show leads? Anything else besides what you just said?
Yeah, there's so many good ones. But if I had to pick only one, it would be that when that contact is created and associated with the event, it would automatically route it to the right rep and enroll it into a follow-up sequence. That single workflow can eliminate that lag between scanning a badge and starting a relevant conversation, which then, and then that lag after, with the follow-up. And we've seen it cut follow-up time from 5+ days to about 15 to 20 minutes. Because when you associate the event, the contact, and the company in a CRM, and you have that one game changer automation, you're going to be able to unlock all kinds of data, but just speeding up that process is going to help so many companies that are like just bogged down by all these manual processes and then having to email everybody individually and manually.
Saving a lot of time and money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So let's be honest, even when companies have a great process on paper, getting the sales team to actually follow up is a whole other challenge. How companies ensure that their sales team actually follow up on leads after the event?
Yeah, we're super huge on training and adoption, which I think is really the key to this. But we found that there's 3 key things that need to happen in order for the salespeople to actually use a system, right? So the first one is making sure that it's easy, that it's not just another thing that they need to input something into, right? So making the work easy is thing 1. Thing 2 is that the expectations are clear, right? So really understanding that if you follow this easy process, you're going to be helped by the workflows, notifications, et cetera, et cetera. And number 3 is that performance is visible. So adding visibility and accountability in the CRM with dashboards that show like the leads, the touches, what pipeline was created, et cetera, not so that you can police them. Well, maybe a little bit, but not so much for policing, but really so that the managers can coach and the reps can see themselves how using the system is going to help them accelerate and contribute to their numbers.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, what are some simple things aviation companies can implement immediately like this week to improve their trade show ROI?
Definitely standardizing their capture method. If anything is, everybody captures the leads in one way and in one sheet at least, not a whole bunch of different ad hocs and everybody doing their own thing. That would be like my number 1 thing that's simple that anybody can do regardless of whether you have a CRM or not. The other one would be to build 3 email templates that you can repurpose from show to show. The first one would be something like a pre-event. We'll be at, for example, MRO Americas, let's meet, with a meeting link if possible. Then an on-site great meeting you at the booth type of template. And then the last one would be like a post-event, like a next steps kind of a nurture that references specific solutions. So, for example, PBH or teardown or USM resource sourcing, whatever you specialize in or whatever you speak to prospects the most. So, building those templates, again, whether you have a full CRM or not, that you can repurpose those templates is going to be a very good time saver. And of course, my favorite is to make sure that you're defining revenue-centric KPIs per show and not just fluff, oh, we had a lot of good conversations or a lot of people stopped by and picked up our swag, right? We want to make sure that we have, some way of looking at number of RFQs that came out of the event, or at least what opportunities were created.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with me. Would you like to say anything else before we end the conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, this is not theory. This has been tried and true. So for example, one aviation client that we rolled out the structured pipeline, their CRM adoption jumped by 67% in 3 months, and their average days to close dropped by 26%, which is exactly the behavior change that we want to see post-event.
That's awesome. I feel like every company, aviation company preparing for MRO Americas specifically, should listen to this before they pack their bags. Omi, thank you so
Absolutely.
much for joining me today and sharing your insights. And to everyone listening, if you're like preparing for upcoming events like MRO America, this is the perfect time to rethink how your team manages leads before, during, and after the show. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye. Thank you so much, Omi, again.
Thank you.